Be a really big show. Woo, woo.
You remember Saturday mornings, cereal in hand, sunlight on the carpet, and cartoons so strange they could only exist in the 60s and 70s. But behind all that fun were some of the weirdest shows ever aired, talking dune buggies, psychedelic monsters, Roman families with Stone Age problems, and secret agent chimpanzees. Most of these have vanished, but the memories haven't. Because once you see what networks actually put on TV back then, you'll never look at Saturday mornings the same way again. Here comes the Grump, 1969.
This time it's the end of the trail for that princess and kid friend of hers. They can't hide from me.
If you grew up in the late 60s, you might remember flipping on the TV and seeing one of the strangest villains ever, the Grump, riding around on that tiny dragon and throwing tantrums like a kid denied breakfast cereal. Here Comes the Grump didn't look like anything else on Saturday mornings. It was loud, neon colored, and filled with that trippy late 60s style you only notice as an adult. The whole show felt like a goofy fantasy dream. Endless castles, weird mazes, floating shapes, and a princess who always needed saving. Kids just loved the chaos. Parents, meanwhile, had no idea what they were looking at. Today, this show has almost vanished, except for a few old uploads floating around online. But here's the strange part. The Grump himself was inspired by someone real. And that secret makes entry number 2 even wilder. Groovy Ghoulies, 1970. Before Monster Mash nostalgia was cool, Groovy Ghoulies gave kids a full-blown monster variety show. Every Saturday, you'd see Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein not scaring anyone, but cracking jokes and singing bubblegum pop songs, like a haunted version of the Monkees. As kids, we didn't realize how bizarre it was. A cartoon horror band doing sketch comedy, music videos, and slapstick inside a creaky old mansion. The strangest part? The humor was fast, almost too fast. Jokes flew by quicker than you could process. And adults watching today, notice how much of it was parodying real 1970s music and TV cliches. Kids just thought the monsters looked funny. But here's the part most people forget. This show shared a universe with another cartoon on your list, and that crossover reveals one of the oddest Saturday morning secrets ever. The Funky Phantom, 1971. If you watched cartoons in the early 70s, you probably remember this show's odd setup. 3 teens solving mysteries with a Revolutionary War ghost who sneezed himself into the future. The Funky Phantom looked like Scooby-Doo at first glance, but something always felt off. The ghost, Mudsie, sounded suspiciously like Snagglepuss, the cat clock smiled for no reason, and the villains always seemed to give up too fast. As kids, we didn't question why a ghost was scared of everything or why the dog acted smarter than the humans. But watching it today, the animation feels rushed. And the humor is strangely slow, yet somehow charming in its own clumsy way. What's strangest is how quickly it disappeared. Only 1 season aired, then it faded out completely. And the reason it vanished leads into the next cartoon, a show that tried to fix the same problem. The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show, 1971. This was the moment kids realized the Flintstones babies were suddenly teenagers with a rock band, a Jeep, and real Saturday morning attitude. The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show felt like Hanna-Barbera's attempt to mix bedrock with the 1970s teen romance, silly adventures, and music that sounded like it came straight off an AM radio. Kids loved seeing Pebbles as a spunky redhead and Bamm-Bamm as the strong but soft-hearted boy next door. The supporting cast Penny, Wiggy, Bad Luck Schleprock was just weird enough to make every episode memorable. Adults today notice how the show stitched modern slang into Stone Age jokes, creating a strange mix that only the 70s could produce. It lasted just 1 season, but reruns made it feel much bigger. And here's the wild part. Its success inspired another Modern Family in ancient times, a show that turned Rome into the Stone Age all over again. The Roman Holidays, 1972.
Groovy and I have never been in a Ferrari.
I'm sorry, kids. I haven't got the time. The boss is waiting.
Please, Mr. Holiday.
Imagine the Flintstones. But instead of dinosaurs and stone cars, you've got chariots, toga jokes, and bosses yelling from Roman balconies. The Roman Holidays tried to take everything that worked in bedrock and move it to ancient Rome. Kids didn't care about the logic, they just loved the bright colors, the goofy pets, and the bouncy theme song. As adults, we noticed the oddness. Modern problems, rent, traffic, cranky neighbors dressed up in Roman costumes. It only ran 13 episodes, yet it somehow burned into Saturday morning memories for an entire generation. The dad, Gus Holliday, was basically Fred Flintstone in sandals. The family struggles felt familiar because they were familiar just dipped in mythology. The show faded fast, but its animation style influenced several other early 70s cartoons. And one of them came from even further back all the way to a futuristic family that keeps jumping between decades. The Jetsons, 1962.
I'll call the doctor. Calling Dr. Ray.
Yes, Mrs. Jetson?
Even though the original run was in the early 60s, most kids in the 70s grew up watching the Jetsons in constant reruns. It felt like the future everyone expected: flying cars, robot maids, talking watches, and push-button everything. As kids, the future looked fun and simple. As adults, we laugh at how high-tech things still depended on vacuum tubes and gears. What made it strange wasn't the gadgets, it was how close the family felt to the Flintstones, just with chrome instead of stone. George hated work. Jane loved shopping. Judy was boy crazy. And Elroy solved more problems than the adults. The weirdest part? Many of the future inventions actually came true: video calls, home automation, treadmills. But one futuristic idea from the show never happened, and that leads directly into the next cartoon's biggest mystery. Hong Kong Phooey, 1974. Kids in the mid-70s adored this cartoon because it made no sense, and that was the magic. A mild-mannered janitor, Penrod Pooch, jumps into a file cabinet and becomes Hong Kong Phooey, a karate master who couldn't fight at all. Every move he made went wrong, and yet he still solved the case thanks to pure luck and his cat, Spot, doing all the real work. The theme song was unforgettable, one of those tunes you can still hum today without trying. But watching it as an adult, you notice how wild the jokes were. Mismatched martial arts, slapstick chaos, and gadgets that clearly didn't work. The show was a parody of kung fu movies long before most kids even knew the genre existed. It lasted only 16 episodes, but lived forever in reruns. And speaking of reruns, the next cartoon became the king of Saturday morning rerun culture, and the one everyone still remembers first. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1969.
Hang around for Scooby-Doo.
No Saturday morning lineup felt complete without that first spooky chord from the Scooby-Doo theme song. Even if you didn't watch every episode, you heard it echoing through living rooms while cereal bowls clinked on coffee tables. What made it strange wasn't the ghosts. It was how every mystery somehow involved the same pattern. A creepy place, a clue nobody noticed, and a villain who always blamed meddling kids. As children, we never questioned why the monsters looked rubbery or why Scooby talked better than half the adults. The strange part today is how genuinely eerie some early episodes were. Foggy docks, abandoned mansions, glowing footprints. It wasn't just kid-friendly, it was atmospheric. And yet it ran endlessly in reruns, becoming the backbone of Saturday mornings. But Scooby wasn't the only hero stopping bad guys with weird powers. The next one didn't even need a van. Space Ghost, 1966.
Your rescue is safely in one of our traps.
Kids in the 70s discovered Space Ghost through reruns, and it felt like superhero cartoons were suddenly blasting into a new dimension. He wasn't silly, he wasn't doing slapstick, he was a straight-up cosmic hero with lasers, invisible force fields, and a booming voice that made him sound like he owned the universe. It was intense for Saturday mornings. As adults, you notice how minimal the animation was. Characters sliding across the screen, villains frozen except for their mouths. But as a kid, none of that mattered. Space Ghost, Jan, Jace, and Blip the Monkey felt like the coolest crew on TV. The enemies were bizarre too. Lava creatures, space cats, bat-winged robots, monsters that looked ripped straight out of comic books. But one hero wasn't enough. Hanna-Barbera doubled down with another space fighter, one who needed his wings more than his gadgets. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, 1967.
Avenger, those sharks.
Birdman was one of those shows kids didn't fully understand, but the moment he shouted Birdman and the sun gave him power, you were hooked. Saturday mornings turned suddenly dramatic when this sun-charged hero soared across the screen, blasting villains with solar rays. His partners, the Galaxy Trio, added even more strangeness. Stretch-O-Man, Vapor-Man, and Gravity Girl, each with powers that made zero sense but looked incredible to a child. Watching now, the pacing feels stiff and the plots are simple, but the style was unforgettable. Adults noticed the heavy narrator, the radio drama delivery, and the fact that every villain seemed to enjoy monologues. But in the 70s reruns, this felt like serious sci-fi. And speaking of style, the next cartoon ditched the drama completely and let a cool cat in a trench coat take over. The Pink Panther Show, 1969. No voices, no long speeches, just smooth jazz, slapstick comedy, and that classy pink cat with a slow walk and sly grin. The Pink Panther Show was unlike anything else on Saturday mornings. Kids didn't need explanations. The Panther's expressions said everything. The Inspector shorts added another layer of silly chaos, mixing French police jokes with cartoon physics that made absolutely no sense. As adults, you notice how stylish it was. Bold colors, quiet scenes, clever timing, and jokes that felt almost grown up. It was one of the few cartoons where silence did the heavy lifting. And every kid remembers that theme song. It practically defined the 70s. But just when cartoons got smooth and jazzy, the next one hit the airwaves with engines roaring and two villains who could never quite get off the ground. Dastardly and Muttley in their flying machines, 1969.
Stop the pigeon! Stop the pigeon! Stop the pigeon!
If you remember turning on the TV and hearing that sputtering engine mixed with Muttley's snickering laugh, you were probably watching this wonderfully absurd spin-off of Wacky Races. The entire show was one long attempt to stop a courier pigeon, just a bird, with gadgets that always malfunctioned, exploded, or backfired. Dastardly yelled, Muttley muttered, and nothing ever worked. As kids, we loved the silly machines, the slapstick disasters, and Muttley's iconic wheezing laugh. As adults, the strange part is how repetitive the show was, and yet how entertaining. Every episode followed the same formula, but you never got tired of watching the Vulture Squadron crash into their own inventions. But if this show was all chaos and noise, the next one slowed everything down, and secretly taught an entire generation without them realizing it. Schoolhouse Rock, 1973.
Multiply backwards from 3 times 10.
3 times 10 is 30. 3 times 9 is 27. 3 times 8 is 24.
Saturday mornings weren't just for cartoons, they were for learning without realizing you were learning. Schoolhouse Rock slipped into commercial breaks and suddenly made grammar, history, and math feel fun. Kids sat with their cereal and found themselves humming conjunction, junction, or counting, along with 3 is a magic number. As adults, we see how strange and brilliant it was. The animation was simple, but the music? Catchy enough to stick in your head for decades. These little shorts turned boring subjects into songs that somehow refuse to leave your memory. Even now, most people can sing the entire I'm Just a Bill without missing a beat. But for all the lessons Schoolhouse Rock taught, Saturday mornings also needed pure fun, and that came from a band of girls who weren't afraid to rock the jungle. Josie and the Pussycats, 1970.
Big cat! No time for crazy cat!
Few shows screamed early. 70s like Josie and the Pussycats. A girl band wearing matching leopard print outfits, solving mysteries, and touring the world. Kids loved the songs, the bright colors, and the goofy chase scenes. The theme song alone felt like a radio hit, and the band's personalities, Josie's charm, Melody's bubble-headed humor, Valerie's brilliance made the show stand out. Rewatching today, you notice the oddness. Villains with bizarre gadgets, sudden musical numbers, and plots that jumped from tropical islands to secret labs without warning. It was a wild mix of Archie Comics energy and Hanna-Barbera chaos. But Josie's success opened the door for another show aimed straight at kids of the inner city, a cartoon with more heart and soul than almost anything on TV at the time. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, 1972. If you grew up in the 70s, you remember hearing, "Hey, hey, hey!" on Saturday mornings. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids felt different from every other cartoon. It tackled real issues like bullying, confidence, honesty, and friendship. But the secret was the Junkyard Gang's creativity. Homemade instruments, wild voices, and stories that always ended with a lesson wrapped inside a lot of heart. As adults, we notice how unusual it was for a kid's cartoon to focus on real-world problems. The pacing was slower, the humor grounded, and the animation simple, but the messages stuck. Even now, people remember episodes more for what they taught than for what happened. But while Fat Albert taught life lessons, another show arrived with the biggest superhero lineup in cartoon history, a team-up no kid could resist. Super Friends, 1973.
There are assembled the world's 4 greatest heroes, created from the cosmic legends of the universe.
When Super Friends hit the screen, it felt like every kid's comic book came to life at once. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, plus the Wonder Twins and their pet monkey joined forces to solve crisis after crisis. The show wasn't violent. It was hopeful, colorful, and built around teamwork. Every episode felt like a mini adventure where the heroes saved the world using brains more than fists. As adults, we see how odd the pacing was. Long speeches, dramatic pauses, and villains who seemed allergic to winning. The animation had that classic Hanna-Barbera stiffness, but the opening theme still gives goosebumps. And yet, for all its cosmic heroics, Saturday mornings also delivered some of the weirdest fantasy worlds ever filmed, starting with a talking flute and a world where nothing followed real logic. Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, 1973. If you watched Saturday mornings in the mid-70s, you probably remember this one. 2 brothers discovering a tiny, friendly sea monster who didn't fit in with his big, mean sea monster family. Sigmund and the Sea Monsters had that classic Sid and Marty Krofft charm, bright colors, oversized costumes, and a world that felt like a beachside daydream. Kids loved Sigmund because he was cute, shy, and always trying to stay out of trouble. As adults, you notice how unusual it all was. Giant puppets wobbling across the sand, villains who looked like melted fishing nets, and jokes that landed only because the characters were so earnest. But the heart of the show, friendship, loyalty, helping the odd one out, still holds up. And while Sigmund hid from monsters, the next show brought back a family we all already knew, but in a whole new Saturday morning way. The Flintstones, 1970s. Even though the Flintstones ended in '66, they practically lived on Saturday mornings throughout the entire 1970s. Kids in that decade grew up thinking Bedrock was still brand new. Fred yelling yabba dabba doo, Barney laughing that goofy laugh, and the Stone Age appliances that somehow worked better than modern ones. The reruns felt timeless, and any new specials felt like events. As adults, you realize how much of the humor was aimed at grown-ups' marriage jokes, work frustrations, neighbors who drive you nuts. But as kids, we just loved Dino, the gadgets, and the never-ending chaos Fred caused every time he opened his mouth. And while Bedrock felt familiar, the next show turned familiarity on its head, using real chimpanzees to act like secret agents. Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp, 1972. This might be one of the strangest ideas ever put on Saturday morning TV. Actual chimpanzees dressed as spies, lip-synced dialogue, and plots pulled straight from spy movies. Kids didn't care that the acting was unpredictable. They just thought it was hilarious watching chimps drive cars, wear sunglasses, and talk like secret agents. The evil CHUMP organization only made it funnier. As adults, you notice how bizarre the whole thing was. Tiny props, stunt doubles in chimp costumes, and jokes that relied entirely on editing. But that absurdity was the charm. Nothing else looked like it, before or since. And just when live-action chimps took over, another famous TV family stepped into animation, bringing along their entire Brady Bunch chaos. The Brady Kids, 1972. Taking one of America's most loved sitcom families and turning them into a cartoon seemed strange, but kids in the early 70 seconds ate it up. The Brady Kids kept the same wholesome energy, but added magic birds, talking animals, and wild adventures the live-action show would never attempt. Greg, Marcia, Peter, Jan, Bobby, and Cindy suddenly lived in a world where anything could happen. As adults, we spot the odd choices. Psychedelic backgrounds, musical numbers out of nowhere, and stories that made absolutely no sense. But it captured exactly what Saturday mornings were about: color, fun, and no rules. And speaking of no rules, the next cartoon put kids behind the wheel and gave them a talking vehicle that stole the show. Speed Buggy, 1973. Speed Buggy was Hanna-Barbera's answer to Scooby-Doo with a twist. Instead of a talking dog, you got a talking dune buggy who sputtered, beeped, and somehow expressed more emotion than half the humans. Kids loved the racing scenes, the clumsy teamwork, and Speedy's nervous roo-roo-roo energy. Each episode mixed adventure, comedy, and mystery, all wrapped in that classic 70 seconds animation style. As adults, it's funny to see how often Speed Buggy saved the day while the teens scrambled to keep up. The plots were simple, the villains silly, and the settings always sunny and colorful. It wasn't complex, but it was fun. And just when cars were talking, the next crew brought even more chaos, with a band of singing animals hosting their own wild variety hour, the Shazam. Kids in the mid 70 seconds didn't care that Shazam was live action. It played right alongside cartoons and fit the Saturday morning vibe perfectly. Billy Batson traveled the country in a classic RV, transforming into Captain Marvel to help people with real-life problems. Each episode had a moral, a gentle message, and a hero who felt more like a friendly neighbor than a muscle-bound comic book giant. Looking back now, it feels wonderfully odd. Simple effects, slow pacing, and villains who rarely posed any real danger. But the charm was undeniable. The show blended superhero fantasy with road trip storytelling, giving kids something different from the usual cartoon chaos. And as superhero shows blended into Saturday mornings, one final character arrived. A prehistoric powerhouse who became a fan favorite without saying much more than a battle yell. The Banana Splits Adventure Hour, if you remember, giant, costumed animals running around a theme park style studio set, singing rock songs, crashing go-karts, and introducing cartoons, you were watching the Banana Splits Adventure Hour. Fleagle, Bingo, Drooper, and Snorky were pure Saturday morning energy, loud, silly, and completely unpredictable. Kids loved the music videos and slapstick comedy, even if none of it made much sense. As adults, you see how bizarre the whole show really was. The psychedelic sets, the strange editing, and the way the splits seemed to live in their own chaotic universe. It felt like a carnival ride that never slowed down. And those unforgettable theme songs, many people still hum tra-la-la-la-la-la-la without even realizing it. But after all that wild energy, Saturday mornings took an even stranger turn, with superheroes and Egyptian magic appearing in real life. Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels. When Captain Caveman burst out of that giant block of ice yelling, "Captain Caveman!" kids knew the fun was about to start. This show mixed mystery-solving teens with the wildest prehistoric superhero ever created. Captain Caveman could pull anything, literally anything out of his fur. Clubs, vehicles, ropes, ladders. The logic didn't matter. It was pure cartoon imagination. As adults, the show feels hilariously chaotic. The mysteries barely mattered, the jokes were fast, and Caveman's powers changed every episode. But that was the charm. He was loud, lovable, and wonderfully unpredictable. Kids in the late 70s remember him as the funniest part of their Saturday mornings. The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, 1972. If you watched Saturday mornings in the early 70s, this one might jog a memory. The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, a mystery show with a van that transformed like a Swiss Army knife. The strange part? The family had 12 kids. 12! Every episode felt like someone dumped an entire kindergarten class into a mystery and hoped for the best. Kids love the fast-paced chases and silly gadgets, but adults today notice how chaotic it really was. Voices overlapped, plots moved too fast, and the van changed shapes for no reason at all. It didn't last long, but it left its mark as one of the most energetic, crowded, and completely bonkers mystery cartoons ever made. And if you think a dozen kids was wild, the next show took a music group and turned them into full-time spies. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, 1973. This cartoon asked a question no one ever asked. What if a teenage pop band doubled as a secret agent team? The result was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. A Hanna-Barbera fever dream where music, mystery, and espionage crashed into each other at full speed. The band had cool gadgets, a talking computer named Mr. Socrates, and a dog who often seemed smarter than the entire group. As kids, we thought it was fun and stylish. As adults, you realize how strange it was. Missions that made no sense, disguises that fooled nobody, and songs that popped in at the weirdest moments. It felt like Scooby-Doo crossed with James Bond, if both had been rewritten during an all-nighter. And speaking of Scooby-style chaos, the next cartoon features a dog who literally disappears when scared. Goober and the Ghostchasers, 1973 to 1975. Another mystery-solving group, another talking dog, but with one unforgettable twist. Goober turned invisible whenever he got scared. Imagine a Great Dane suddenly vanishing, except for his hat and collar floating in midair. Kids thought it was hilarious. Adults watching now wonder how anyone solved anything with half the cast afraid of their own shadows. The show even featured animated versions of the Partridge Family, making it one of the weirdest crossovers in Saturday morning history. The ghosts, gags, and gadgets all felt familiar, but slightly off, like a dream version of Scooby-Doo. It wasn't a big hit, but it lived rent-free in a lot of childhood memories, mostly because of Goober's disappearing act. But if invisible dogs weren't strange enough, the next show sucked a whole family straight into the Stone Age. Valley of the Dinosaurs, 1974. This cartoon starts like a normal rafting trip, and then suddenly the whole family gets sucked into a whirlpool and wakes up in a prehistoric world filled with cavemen and dinosaurs. Every Saturday morning, kids watch the same family try to survive using equal parts teamwork and 1970s optimism. The show felt more serious than other cartoons, fewer jokes, more danger, and surprisingly detailed dinosaurs. Adults today notice the unusual tone. Part survival drama, part educational lesson, part what now, adventure. The family constantly invented tools, built rafts, and tried to get home, but somehow never actually did. It wasn't flashy, but it was unforgettable, a lost gem in the Saturday morning lineup. And while this show focused on survival, the next one focused on stunts, danger, and real-life drama. Devlin, 1974 to 1975. Inspired by the Evel Knievel craze, Devlin was one of the rare Saturday morning shows that took itself seriously. No talking animals, no slapstick gang, just a trio of siblings traveling with a motorcycle stunt show, dealing with real-life problems between jumps. Kids expecting wild comedy got instead a show about responsibility, safety, and doing the right thing with the occasional mid-air stunt thrown in. As adults, the seriousness stands out even more. Devlin dealt with injuries, guilt, consequences, topics way heavier than most cartoons dared to touch. It was bold, different, and maybe too mature for Saturday morning TV, which is probably why it faded fast. But that's what makes it unforgettable, a dramatic outlier in a lineup filled with talking cars and invisible dogs. And that's what makes these cartoons unforgettable. They were strange, silly, and completely unlike anything today. Saturday mornings were more than cartoons. They were the rhythm of childhood. A quiet house, a glowing TV, and a world that felt fun, wild, and safe all at once. These shows didn't always make sense, but they didn't have to. They were part of growing up in a time when imagination had no limits.